Good morning. My name is Emily Marks, and I am the Chief U.S. District Judge for the Middle District of Alabama. On behalf of the court, I extend to you all a very warm welcome. It is our great honor and privilege to have you all here in this historic courtroom, America's courtroom, to reflect on the legacy of Judge Frank M. Johnson, Jr. On the bench with me is Circuit Judge Joel Dubina, and we have a wonderful program for you this morning. We will start with our very own Broderick Johnson, law clerk to Judge Myron Thompson, who will play the Star Spangled Banner on his saxophone for us. Broderick? If you will all remain standing, please, I now ask Sophia Adams and Madison Etheridge to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Okay. Ready? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And now to introduce our next performance for us is Thomas Raines, the Executive Director of the Johnson Institute.
Good morning. Thank you, Judge Marks. I'm Thomas Raines. I have the honor of serving as Executive Director of the Judge Frank Johnson Institute. As Judge Marks said, we are gathered this morning in America's courtroom. In the 1950s and 60s, with Judge Frank Johnson presiding, Americans came here seeking justice. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. sat in this courtroom as party to numerous cases. The attorneys for Mrs. Rosa Parks and the plaintiffs in Browder versus Gale came to this courtroom seeking justice. A young Mr. John Lewis came to this courtroom time and again as he got into what he called good trouble. In his book, Walking with the Wind, he describes this courtroom as, quote, an imposing setting with its enormously high ceilings and arched windows, its dark oak benches, its massive doors covered with brown leather. In fact, there is history built into the architecture of this courtroom that first opened in 1933. 48 stars adorn the blue field behind the judge's bench, one for each of this in the State of the Union at the time. The ceiling is made from hand-painted cork tiles, a remnant of the Great Depression's public works programs. And many of you are seated underneath a balcony that was once used to enforce local customs of segregation. It was during the 1950s and 60s, however, that this courtroom earned that nickname, America's Courtroom. It was also called an oasis of justice. Citizens who had been wronged came to understand that they could find justice here and that the rule of law would be upheld by the presiding judge. Frank Menace Johnson Jr. was appointed U.S. District Judge in the fall of 1955 by President Dwight Eisenhower. He was just 37 years old and had grown up in Winston County, a county full of rocky hills in the northern part of Alabama. It was known for being a stronghold of Lincoln Republicans since the Civil War due to its opposition to secession. In just a matter of weeks after becoming a judge, Judge Johnson began presiding over cases that would change the world from this courtroom, beginning with Browder versus Gale in 1956, in the case of city bus segregation that was filed in February of 1956, leading up through Williams versus Wallace in March of 1965, 59 years ago this month, and later landmark cases upholding the human rights of some of society's most vulnerable members, prisoners and the mentally ill. Through it all, Judge Johnson would say that he was just doing his job to uphold the Constitution as interpreted by the Supreme Court. Now, for our first segment of today's program, I have the pleasure of introducing theater artist from the Alabama State University College of Visual and Performing Arts, led by Dr. Wendy Coleman, who's dean of the college. Last fall, we began talking with Dr. Coleman about a program to honor Dr. King for a court celebration in January. The result was the Johnson Institute commissioning a short piece using the words of Dr. King, including portions of his 1965 testimony in Williams versus Wallace given in this courtroom. Today, the ASU students will be performing a modified version of Faces of a King that incorporates other notable testimony as well, as you'll see. The words you will hear this morning come from historical writings, speeches, and testimony. We hope that you enjoy.
Tell them about the Middle District Court in Montgomery. When you tell my story.
Tell them about Alabama's Capitol steps at the close of the Great March from Selma to Montgomery.
My story. When you tell my story. Faces of a King. Dateline, March 13th, 1965. The Middle District Court of Alabama. The Honorable Frank M. Johnson, Jr. presiding.
Would you please state your name for the record?
My name is Martin Luther King, Jr.
What is your position, Dr. King?
I am president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and co-pastor of the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia.
What is the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Dr. King?
The Southern Christian Leadership Conference is an organization working in the civil rights movement that came into being in 1957 to serve as a channel through which local protest organizations in the South could centralize their protest activities. It works for the complete integration of the Negro in American life through the philosophy and the method of nonviolence.
This is the basic philosophy that undergirds the Southern Christian Leadership Conference.
Could you explain what you mean by the philosophy of nonviolence, Dr. King?
Yes, this philosophy says that one must have the inner determination to resist what conscience tells him is evil with all the strength and courage and zeal that he can muster. At the same time, he must not resort to violence or hatred in the process.
And never coming to the point of retaliating with violence or using violence as an aggressive weapon in the process.
I have said and have tried to write about it. Non-cooperation with evil is as much an evil as cooperation with evil. I think there are times that laws can be unjust. Sometimes a moral man has no alternative but to disobey that law. But he must be willing to do it openly, cheerfully, lovingly, civilly, not uncivilly, with the willingness to accept the penalty. He must do this with a hope and a belief that by doing it in this way, he will arouse the conscience of the community and therefore lead to the bright day. What happened that Sunday, I felt that as a nonviolent leader and with a deep passion to keep our whole struggle nonviolent, I felt I had a moral obligation to the movement,
To justice.
To our nation.
to the health of our democracy.
Faces of a King. Date 9, April 16, 1963, Birmingham, Alabama.
My dear fellow clergymen, while confined here in the Birmingham City Jail, I have come across your recent statements calling my present activities unwise and untimely. Seldom do I take the time to respond to criticisms of my work and ideas. But I think I should indicate why I am here in Birmingham. I am here in Birmingham because injustice is here. And just as Paul left his village to carry the gospel of Jesus Christ, I too am compelled to carry the gospel of freedom beyond my own hometown. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned with what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. You may well ask, why sit-ins, marches, and so forth? Is it negotiation a better path? We have waited 340 years for our God-given and constitutional rights. Perhaps it is easier for those who have never felt the stinging darts of segregation to say, wait. When you have seen vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers at will, when you have seen them drown your brothers and sisters at whim, when you have seen hate-filled policemen curse, kick, and even kill your black brothers and sisters.
When you see the vast majority of 20 million Negro brothers smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in the midst of an affluent society.
When you suddenly find your tongue twisted and your speech stammering, you seek to explain to your 6-year-old daughter she can't even go to the public amusement park that has just been advertised on TV.
When you are harried by day and haunted by night, by the fact that you are a Negro, living constantly in tiptoe stance, never quite knowing what to expect, and you are plagued with inner fears and scarred with outer resentments.
You speak of our activities in Birmingham as extreme. Oppressed people cannot remain oppressed forever. We must move with a great sense of urgency toward the promised land of racial justice.
And go home to my Lord and be free. Faces of King, date 9, August 28, 1963, the Lincoln Memorial, Washington, D.C.
When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note served as a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. it is obvious that America has faltered on this promise. Insofar as her citizens of color are concerned, America has given the Negro people a bad check. A check which has come back marked insufficient funds.
That's right, that's right.
But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice has gone bankrupt. And so we have come to cash this check. A check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom.
Yes, sir.
And the security of justice. We are not satisfied.
Never satisfied.
As long as a Negro in Mississippi cannot vote, no, we are not satisfied. As long as a Negro in New York feels as if there is nothing for which to vote, we will never be satisfied.
Never satisfied.
Not until justice rolls down like rain and righteousness like a mighty stream.
Faces of a King. Dateline, March 25th, 1965, the Alabama State Capitol, Montgomery, Alabama.
Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up to freedom land. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on walking, keep on marching up to freedom land.
Last Sunday, more than 8,000 of us started on a mighty walk from Selma. We have walked through desolate valleys and across trying hills.
Yes, sir.
We have walked on to meandering highways and rested our bodies on rocky byways. Some of our faces are burned from the outpourings of the sweltering sun. Some have literally slept in mud. We have been drenched by the rains. Our bodies are tired and our feet are somewhat sore.
They told us we wouldn't get here. There were those who said we would get here only over their dead bodies. But all the world knows today that we are here. We are standing before the forces of power in the state of Alabama saying we are not going to let anyone turn us around.
Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up to freedom land. Dr. King had a story to tell. But there was an Alabama native, a king in his own right, who right here in this very courtroom sat in the shadow of the one for whom it would eventually be named to tell his story too.
State your name, occupation, and address, please.
I am John Lewis, National Chairman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee.
Native of Troy, Alabama.
Are you one of the plaintiffs in this case?
I am.
Has your organization engaged in any demonstrations, marches?
We have engaged in nonviolent demonstrations, nonviolent marches to the Dallas County Courthouse.
And as a result of such demonstrations and marches, have you or any of your workers been beaten by the police?
Well, I have been arrested, and I have been beaten in Dallas County.
Would you tell us about this arrest? How these arrests and these beatings? When was the first?
I object to this, I object.
25th, 1963.
On to the march now. Were you one of the leaders of the march?
Hosea Williams and I were at the front line.
Can you tell us what this is a photograph of?
This is a photograph from the scene where state troopers were pushing, trampling, and beating some of us that were on the front lines. And I see myself right there. The state troopers standing over me.
About how many of you were there?
I would say between 650, 700.
In your best judgment, how far across the bridge did you get?
About 50 feet away from the line of state troopers. Before we crossed the bridge, we could see that line of state troopers. I saw so many. It was hard for me to tell how many there were. Had to be about between 80 and 100.
Some were standing across the highway, all the way across. Others were standing on the side. There were even some in the background.
How close did you approach to these officers before your line stopped?
We were able to move about 50 feet. Then a state trooper with a bullhorn or a megaphone said, "This march will not continue."
Did the line stop?
The line stopped still.
You didn't advance any further.
We
We
stopped.
stopped right then.
Then what happened, Mr. Lewis?
Then a man said, "I'm Major Cloud, and this is an unlawful assembly. This demonstration must end. The governor has ordered it, and I'm ordering you to disperse." And I said, "May I have a minute, Major Cloud?"
No! I will give you 2 minutes to leave.
"Just a minute, Major Cloud."
There will be no word.
And a moment after that, Major Cloud told the troops to advance. And they took their positions.
And they moved forward with their clubs over their shoulders. The top part of the body came rushing in, knocking us down,
And were you
pushing us
hit?
down.
Were you hit at the time?
I was hit on my head.
My head, right here. I was hit twice. Once when I was lying down and when I was attempting to get back up.
Were any words said by the troopers?
Well, most of them kept saying, "Move back! Move back, you niggas! Disperse!"
Calling people black bitches.
Sons of bitches, things like that.
Did you see any of the marchers use any violence at all in an effort to defend themselves or fight the police officers?
Most of the people in the line knelt in a prayerful manner. Their heads back towards Selma. Kneeling. The line back as far as you could see. Kneeling and praying.
Even while praying, the major ordered the troops to put on their gas masks. And they started throwing gas.
The people had to stop praying. They got sick and started vomiting.
Some of us were forced off the highway, behind buildings.
Oh God, heal them, Lord Jesus, please. Give us strength. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up to freedom.
I am not unmindful that some of you have come here out of great trials and tribulations. Some of you have come from places where your quest for freedom has left you battered by the storms of persecution and staggered by the winds of police brutality. You have been veterans of creative suffering. But I tell you today, my friends, let us not wallow in the valley of despair. Though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I stand here and I still have a dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
I have a dream that one day, right down in Alabama, the little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers.
I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted and every hill and mountain shall be made low.
The rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together.
And this will be the day when all of God's children will join hands and sing with new meaning.
My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. And where my fathers died, land of the pilgrims cried, from every mountainside, let freedom ring.
And when this happens, when we allow freedom to ring, on this day, all of God's children will be able to stand together, black men as well as white men, Protestants as well as Catholics, Jews as well as Muslims. We'll be able to join hands and sing the words of the old Negro spiritual. Free at last. Free at last. Thank God Almighty. We're free at last.
Thank God Almighty, we are free.
I know you all have a big weekend planned, but I think there's probably fair to say that's what we're doing this year. That was a very nice weekend. Thank you all. And I feel compelled to apologize in advance to Judge Dubina for having to follow that. But I do now have the distinct honor and privilege of introducing Judge Joel Dubina. Judge Dubina sits on the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals and significantly is the father of former Congresswoman Martha Roby, who is a member of the Faith and Politics Board of Directors. Judge Dubina, who is from Montgomery, was a senior in high school when the walk from Selma to Montgomery took place, and he will share with us his reflections on Williams versus Wallace and on Judge Frank Johnson.
Thank you very much, Chief Judge Marks, and welcome to all of you to Montgomery again. I do see some familiar faces from 4 years ago when I addressed all of you in this very courtroom. That is a tough act for me to find. In fact, before I make any remarks, I think we ought to give these young people another round of applause. The last time I addressed this assembly in this courtroom, I discussed with you my professional and my personal relationship with my late colleague, mentor, and friend, Judge Frank M. Johnson, Jr. On that occasion, for those of you who may recall, I related some stories from some of the fishing trips I took with the judge, as well as serving with him as an active judge in my first 2 years on the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. Judge Johnson was an important decision maker in some of our nation's most significant cases, one of which I have been asked to discuss with you this morning. The case we're going to look at was not a desegregation case, nor did it involve the constitutional rights of prisoners or patients involuntarily committed to mental health institutions in the state of Alabama. All of those decisions Judge Johnson rendered were important to the rule of law in our nation. But instead, the case we're going to look at this morning, you've already seen a portrayal of it, and I must say it's very accurate of what these young people portrayed about this case. But the case of Williams versus Wallace, in my view, was really a voting rights case. But it's interesting when you read the opinion, Judge Johnson never calls it a voting rights case. He calls it a case involving the right to demonstrate and protest and to petition government officials for redress of grievances. And he uses that terminology throughout his opinion. In my view, what happened on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama on March 7, 1965, known to all of us as Bloody Sunday, coupled with Judge Johnson's decision in Williams versus Wallace, became the catalyst for the passage of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, clearly one of the most important pieces of legislation ever passed by Congress. So this morning I want us to take an in-depth look at this case. First, who were the parties? The named plaintiffs were Hosea Williams, an African-American civil rights leader, an activist, an ordained minister, a businessman, a philanthropist, a scientist, and a politician. He was a member of Dr. King's inner circle. Amelia Boynton, later Robinson, was a civil rights pioneer who championed voting rights for African Americans. And last but not least, someone who is familiar to all of us, John Lewis, who served in Congress for many years, including with many of you, and also with my daughter Martha during the 10 years she served in Congress. Sadly, all the named plaintiffs in this case have passed away. Amelia Robinson died in 2015 at age 104. And I'm going to say another word about her in just a moment. The reason I refer to the plaintiffs as named plaintiffs is because this case was brought as a class action in federal court by these three plaintiffs on behalf of themselves and all of us similarly situated. Who were the defendants? Governor George C. Wallace was governor of Alabama at that time. Al Ringo was director of public safety for the state of Alabama. And James G. Clark was sheriff of Dallas County, Alabama, at the time all of these events occurred. They too are all deceased. And even though Sheriff Clark was an avowed racist right up to the time of his death, he never apologized for any of the events that happened. Mrs. Robinson attended his funeral. Talk about an example of forgiveness for all of us. Amelia Boyd Robinson attended Sheriff Clark's funeral. Who were the party's lawyers and the law firms involved in this case? The short answer is some of the best in our state and nation. Except for the New York City lawyers and some of the Justice Department lawyers, I personally knew the rest. Sadly, except for Fred Gray, one of our nation's greatest civil rights lawyers, who is still practicing law today at age 93. Most of the other lawyers have passed away. Why was this case brought, and what were the plaintiffs asking for? Under Alabama law, registration is a prerequisite to voting in any election. In a number of counties in central Alabama, including Dallas County, where Selma, Alabama is located, fewer than 10% of all the African Americans of voting age were registered to vote. There was a reason for that. For a number of years, there had been an almost continuous pattern of conduct of harassment, intimidation, coercion, threatening conduct, and sometimes even brutal mistreatment that existed on the part of law enforcement officials towards members of the plaintiff class who were attempting to register to vote and to protest discriminatory voter registration practices in the state of Alabama. In his opinion, Judge Johnson gave example after example of intimidation, harassment, and brutal treatment, specifically on the part of defendants Lingo and Clark, together with law enforcement officials under their command. More importantly, these instructions of harassment and brutal treatment came directly from the governor of the state of Alabama himself, George C. Wallace. This all reached a climax on March 7, 1965, when approximately 650 marchers left the church in Selma, Alabama, for the purpose of walking 45 miles to Montgomery, Alabama, to present to the governor their grievances concerning the voter registration processes in a number of central Alabama counties. The marchers proceeded in an orderly and peaceful manner along the street to the Edmund Pettus Bridge. On the far side of the bridge, the marchers were confronted by 60 to 70 state troopers, Dallas County deputy sheriffs, and other individuals referred to by Judge Johnson, in his opinion, as possemen on horseback. The marchers were ordered to disperse and given 2 minutes to do so. When they failed to disperse, the state troopers and members of the Dallas County Sheriff's Office and possemen moved against the marchers. These law enforcement officers, equipped with tear gas, nauseous gas, and canisters of smoke, as well as billy clubs and cattle prods, advanced on the marchers. The marchers were prodded, struck, beaten, and knocked down by law enforcement officials. Approximately 75 to 80 of the marchers were seriously injured, with a large number having to be hospitalized. The events that occurred that day were televised and sent to news media all across our nation. Suffice it to say, the attempted march on March 7, 1965 involved nothing more than a peaceful effort on the part of American citizens to exercise a classic constitutional right, that is, the right to assemble peaceably and to petition one's government for the redress of grievances. The very next day, a complaint was filed by the plaintiffs in the United States District Court for the Middle District of Alabama, including a motion for a temporary restraining order and a motion for a preliminary injunction. The United States Department of Justice, by leave of court, filed a complaint and intervention. In their prayer for relief, the plaintiffs asked the court to guarantee their right to assemble and demonstrate peaceably for the purpose of redressing their grievances concerning their right to register to vote in the state of Alabama without unlawful interference. They also asked the court to permit them to walk peaceably along the public highway, U.S. Highway 80, between Selma and Montgomery, and asked the court to enjoin and restrain the defendants and all persons acting in concert with them from arresting, harassing, or in any way interfering with their peaceful, nonviolent march from Selma to Montgomery. Interestingly, on March 9, 1965, Judge Johnson denied the plaintiff's application for a restraining order, which was sought without any notice to the defendants and without a hearing. Let me just stop there and tell all of you, federal judges have the power when a temporary restraining order is filed, what we call a TRO, to grant ex parte relief. That is, without giving notice to the other side and giving the other side an opportunity to be heard. When I was a trial judge, I never did that. I doubt Chief Judge Marks did it either. I know Judge Johnson didn't do it because he always believed the other side deserved to receive notice and have an opportunity to be heard. That is why he denied the plaintiff's motion for a temporary restraining order in this case. Additionally, Judge Johnson was informed that the plaintiffs intended to continue their mass march between Selma and Montgomery before the court had an opportunity to adjudicate the respective rights of the parties. Consequently, Judge Johnson entered an order temporarily restraining any further attempts on the part of the plaintiffs to enforce the rights they asked the court to judiciously determine until the court could conduct an evidentiary hearing. Thankfully, the plaintiffs obeyed Judge Johnson's order, even though some civil rights leaders wanted to immediately attempt to march again. Subsequently, Judge Johnson conducted a 4.5-day evidentiary hearing in this very courtroom that we are in this morning. Numerous witnesses testified and several exhibits were offered into evidence. Judge Johnson then issued his opinion and order dated March 19, 1965, making findings of fact and conclusions of law. The most amazing part of Judge Johnson's order to me, as a lawyer and as a jurist myself, was the appendix he attached to his opinion, which demonstrated through statistics the heart of the problem and shows why the plaintiffs brought their complaint. For example, keep in mind, this is 1965. For example, in Dallas County, as of November 1964, where African American citizens of voting age outnumbered white citizens of voting age, only 2.2% of African Americans were registered to vote. In Perry County, as of August 1964, where African American citizens of voting age outnumbered white citizens of voting age, only 7% of the African Americans were registered to vote. And then the most outlandish of all the examples listed in the appendix, in Courthouse County, as of December 1963, where African American citizens of voting age outnumbered white citizens over 2-to-1, there was not one single African American registered to vote in Courthouse County, although 100% of the white citizens of voting age in Courthouse County were registered. Judge Johnson went on to list several other counties in the appendix which showed similar disturbing numbers. Judge Johnson then stated in his opinion that the law was clear that the right to petition one's government for the redress of grievances may be exercised in large groups. He went on to say, indeed, whereas in this case, minorities have been harassed, coerced, and intimidated, group association may be the only realistic way of exercising such rights. He cited numerous cases from the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which at that time the state of Alabama was a part of, upholding the same rights the plaintiffs sought in Williams. Judge Johnson was also very careful to recognize that government authorities have the duty and responsibility of keeping streets and highways open and available for their ordinary uses. However, he also noted a citizen or group of citizens have the constitutional right to assemble and petition their government or governmental authorities for redress of grievances, even if by mass demonstration, as long as the exercise of those rights is peaceful. The opinion itself was very narrow, and that Judge Johnson made it clear his only concern in the case was with the right to demonstrate and protest by marching along the public highway from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama. After conducting a balancing test and balancing the rights of the officials to keep the highway clear and open versus the plaintiff's right of assembly and free movement within the state of Alabama along a public highway, Judge Johnson entered his preliminary injunction. He also adopted a proposed plan for the march that the plaintiffs had proposed, even though the defendants had been served with copies of the plaintiff's plan. They objected to it, but they never offered any evidence in support of their contention that the plan or any portion of it was unreasonable. It was also significant that neither Governor Wallace nor Sheriff Park testified at the evidentiary hearing. Judge Johnson's injunction enjoined the governor, the Director of Public Safety, the Sheriff of Dallas County, and their agents, employees, successors, and officers, and all of those in active concert or participation with the defendants from intimidating, threatening, coercing, or interfering with the proposed march. He also ordered the defendants to provide adequate police protection to the plaintiffs in their exercise of their constitutional rights. Of course, the rest is history. So it demonstrated this morning, just a while ago. Tragically, along the march, Viola LaRusso, the mother of 5 young children from Michigan, was murdered in Lowndes County by members of the Ku Klux Klan on March 25, 1965. There is a marker on a hill outside Lounsboro along Highway 80 commemorating her assassination. The march itself took 4.5 days, and the last stop was at the St. Jude Hospital Complex on Fairview Avenue within the city limits of Montgomery. The following day, the marchers were to enter downtown Montgomery on Court Street, which runs right beside this courthouse we're all in this morning. It's a one-way street going out of town, but the marchers came in against what would ordinarily be the flow of traffic on this particular day. Even though I was a senior in high school, I was present the day the marchers came in. As long as I live, I will never be able to erase from my mind the picture I saw that day. President Johnson had nationalized the National Guard, and soldiers with rifles were literally lined shoulder to shoulder on both sides of Dexter Avenue, from the Capitol all the way down to the Court Square Fountain, which is only 1 block from this courthouse. That is where the marchers came in. Members of the Ku Klux Klan were in front of the Capitol on the left-hand side in their long hooded robes, as well as Montgomery County Sheriff Maxim Butler and his deputies on horseback to be sure the Klan didn't do something violent. Governor Wallace came out and gave a hellfire and brimstone speech ranting against the federal government as the marchers began their ascent to the base of the Capitol steps. Thankfully, order was kept that day, and I don't recall seeing any acts of violence against any of the marchers. The marchers were not all African American. There were a number of white people marching with them, including priests, because I specifically remember seeing the collars on some of the marchers that typically Episcopal and Roman Catholic priests wear. Once they reached the Capitol steps, I left the scene, but I believe what I saw that day had a profound effect on my own view of our justice system in this nation. Watching people risking their lives as American citizens for a God-given constitutional right showed me courage and determination like I had never witnessed before. Also, the courage Judge Johnson showed in entering the injunction he did, although narrowly tailored, made me proud of him and proud of our federal court system. As many of you traveled to Selma this weekend, on the same route these marchers took, remember these events, the sacrifices the marchers made, and the courage and determination they exhibited, as well as the courage exhibited by Judge Frank M. Johnson. I thank Faith in Politics and the Johnston Institute for permitting me to share these thoughts. Thank you very much.
We will now hear from Johnson Institute board member and former law clerk to Judge Frank N. Johnson Jr. Debbie.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you about the Johnson Institute. We are a non-partisan, non-profit, non-political 501c3. We work with the court to tell the story of the Constitution. First, I want to give you just an idea of who does our work. I would like some people to stand, if you don't mind. I'm not going to call on them. But all the judges who've worked with us in any way, as well as members of their staff, maybe up top, if you've helped us out, our board members, we have a couple anyway, and any other volunteer I might have omitted, could you just please stand? Raines to stand. He is our only full-time employee. He has a staff of 3 part-time employees. If y'all would stand, but it's because of these other people who stood that we're able to do so very much. And but for those pesky security clearances, we would have a lot more volunteers in here. So our mission is to illuminate constitutional issues and perspectives, to foster thoughtful and civil discourse, and to inspire our national community in our nation's never-ending pursuit of a more perfect union. Now, inherent in that phrase, more perfect, is that we will never be perfect. We can always improve. It's never ending. But we know as we work toward this more perfect union that we have a very, very valuable tool in our toolbox. It's supposed to be a Constitution up here. We have pocket constitutions that we give people when they come here. Unfortunately today, a lot of folks really don't understand our Constitution. You know, because you're here, you know it protects rights of free speech and religion and free press. And you know, more importantly, it provides a framework for governing ourselves, for resolving differences among ourselves. But a lot of people never learned, or at least they've forgotten. Trust me, a lot of people don't know the 3 branches of government. But they didn't learn these things. And, or again, they've forgotten. And then let's face it, even for people who know a lot about our Constitution, in this very fractured world, it's so easy to lose sight of the aim of our Constitution. The goal, this framework, to work together to form a more perfect union. So how do we accomplish this very simple mission? The vast majority of our programs use this courthouse and the historic cases decided in this courtroom to make the Constitution come alive. We teach students, we teach teachers, how to teach students, and we host a lot of other visitors. People come from all over the country to attend our programs. Yesterday, we didn't do it in this courtroom because we were setting up, but we ran one of our workshops called Civil Discourse and Difficult Decisions. Civil Discourse, Difficult Decisions. With a group of high schoolers from Montgomery. We combined them with a group of high schoolers from Connecticut. This is the second time that that school from Connecticut has brought students down here to participate in our programs. We combined them, and together they worked with volunteer attorneys to analyze the facts and the law for a real Supreme Court case. And you know what they learned? Different people have different perspectives. And to put it the way Judge Watkins would if he was here, no matter how thin the pancake is, they're always close. So, they learned how to discuss differences respectfully, which is huge. And then they presented their views to a federal judge. Now, you all are very important people, and you can forget that a federal judge, to our average visitor, let alone a high school student, is super impressive. So imagine that experience that those high schoolers had. It's an unforgettable memory. Thank you for allowing me this time to tell you a little bit about the Johnson Institute. You have some material that you can take with you. If you would ever like to come back and visit the courthouse, please call. We arrange tours all the time, and we would love to have you. Thank you very much.
I want to thank you all so much for spending time with us this morning during what I am sure is going to be a very meaningful weekend for all of you. Court is adjourned.